I remember the sound before I remember the words. Laughter, sharp, glittering, cruel, spilling across the marble hall like shards of broken glass. It clung to the pillars, to the golden banners above, to the scent of burning cedar meant to bless the union. The wolves of Silverpine had gathered to witness their king's jest, the Alpha wedding a rejected Omega, me. They called it a ritual of appeasement, a joke offered to the moon, so she might lift the curse that haunted Kaelin Draven's reign, an empty marriage to satisfy an old superstition. I suppose I should have bowed my head in gratitude, an Omega elevated to queen, even in mockery, but I only felt the silence beneath my heartbeat. The stillness before something breaks. The Alpha King stood at the altar, tall and severe, his black ceremonial coat threaded with silver runes. His eyes, cold, calculating, beautiful in a way that wounded, never once met mine. To him, this ceremony was theater. Every bow, every whispered vow, a performance for his trembling court. His smile held no warmth, only pride sharpened to a blade. I'd seen that smile before. Years ago, when my first mate rejected me before the entire pack. He'd laughed then too, though not like this. His laughter had been desperate, afraid of what claiming me might mean. Kaelin's laughter now was something else entirely. Control disguised as amusement, dominance cloaked in charm. "By moon and by blood," intoned the high priestess, her voice echoing through the grand hall. "Do you, Kaelin Draven, take this Omega to stand beside you?" Kaelin's lips curved faintly. "I take her," he said, his tone dripping with irony, "as proof that even the lowest among us can serve the kingdom, if only to entertain it." A wave of laughter rolled through the court. It should have broken me. Perhaps that was the intent. But I felt nothing. Not shame, not rage, only that hum beneath my skin again, low and steady, like a heartbeat that wasn't entirely my own. "And you, Lyra Vale," the priestess asked, "do you take the Alpha King as mate and lord?" My throat felt dry, but my voice, when it came, was calm. "I take him," I said softly, "as the moon bears witness to all vows, sincere or false." A murmur rippled through the audience. Kaelin's eyes flickered, just for an instant, meeting mine through the veil. He didn't expect defiance from an Omega, certainly not from one he'd chosen as a mockery of fate. The priestess tied the red cord around our joined hands. It burned faintly, the thread alive with ancient magic that neither of us acknowledged. "Bound by ritual," she declared, "bound until death or release beneath the moon." The room erupted in applause and cruel toasts. Crystal goblets clinked. Servants poured wine that smelled of crushed berries and arrogance. I stood beside my new husband, my palm pressed to his, the cord tightening with every heartbeat. He leaned close enough that I could feel his breath against my ear. "Congratulations, Omega," he murmured, low enough that only I could hear. "You've made history. No one will ever forget the day the Alpha King wed the pack's most pitied stray." The words were meant to wound. They didn't. Because beneath the venom, beneath the mocking ceremony, I felt it. The pulse of power inside me responding to his touch. It wasn't submission. It was recognition. The bond might have been forged as a joke, but something older, older than vows or bloodlines, had begun to wake. The feast stretched on. Dancers whirled in silver masks. The court laughed too loudly to hide its unease. Kaelin held himself like a king carved from obsidian. Perfect posture, perfect control. But when the torches dimmed, I saw him flinch. The mark on his wrist, his royal sigil, flared faintly blue beneath the skin. The omen's color, the sign of coming downfall. He noticed me watching and masked it with a smirk. "Superstition," he said to no one in particular, as if the word could banish what burned beneath his flesh. But I knew better. I had seen omens before, smelled them in the shifting air, felt them in the tremor of my bones. The moon didn't waste her warnings on those who still had choices left to make. When the ceremony ended, I was escorted to my new chambers, lavish, cold, and heavy with the scent of iron. A gilded cage, nothing more. They left me there without a word, as if the Queen of Silverpine had already been forgotten. I removed the veil and looked at my reflection in the frost-touched mirror. My eyes glowed faintly, just for a heartbeat, a shimmer of silver, gone as quickly as it came. The hum beneath my skin deepened, spreading warmth through my veins like liquid light. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, wolves howled, a sound of mourning, or perhaps warning. I closed my eyes and listened. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them toast their false victory. They don't yet know the price of mockery, because the moon was listening, and the bond they made for jest had already begun to take its shape inside me, ancient, patient, unstoppable. They called me the Paper Queen, a name that sounded soft, harmless, fragile enough to tear, useless once wet. I heard it whispered in corridors, laced into laughter that stopped when I entered a room. Every sound in Silverpine Palace carried through the stone like confession. Even silence had a shape here, sharp and heavy, settling around me like a crown I was never meant to wear. The first week of my so-called reign was a theater of humiliation. My chambers, though gilded, were placed in the oldest wing of the palace, drafty, dim, and far from the Alpha's quarters. The maids assigned to me were chosen carefully, loyal to Kaelin, loyal to Mockery. They bowed with precision, eyes lowered just long enough to pretend respect, then smirked once I turned away. Her Majesty, they called me, their voices dripping with irony, as if the title itself was a jest. Kaelin, my husband, my king, made no effort to disguise the truth. He dined with his council and courted amusement in the company of beautiful she-wolves, their laughter spilling into the marble halls like honeyed venom. At feasts, he spoke of charity marriages, of the kingdom's strength in pitying the weak. Every word was aimed like an arrow. And yet, he never dismissed me from the table. He wanted me there, silent, invisible, a reminder to everyone of how invincible he was. His power was so absolute, he could afford to bind himself to the least among them and still remain untouched. I learned to sit perfectly still, to let my stillness unsettle them. The more they mocked, the quieter I became, until my silence itself seemed to thicken the air. The servants began avoiding my gaze. Some swore that my eyes glowed faintly under candlelight. Others claimed the torches burned lower when I entered a room. Lies, they said. Yet they spoke them in whispers, glancing at the frost that crept across the windows whenever I passed. I didn't remember when it started. The frost. The palace was warm, its hearths ever burning, yet I would find the mirrors filmed with a thin layer of ice, patterns forming like veins beneath glass. When I exhaled, I could see my breath. The air shifted around me, alive and watchful. At first, I thought it was grief, some cruel manifestation of the ache that had followed me since the day of the vows. But then the wolves began to notice. It happened in the courtyard, during the changing of the guard. I had wandered outside for air, drawn by the sound of their howls echoing through the twilight. A group of young soldiers was leading the pack through its paces, the Alpha's banner flapping crimson above them. When they saw me approach, their smirks were predictable. "Careful, men," one of them muttered. "The queen might cry frost on your boots." They laughed, sharp and cruel, but then one of the wolves, a massive silver male, stopped mid-step. His ears flattened, and a low sound rumbled from his chest. The others followed suit, bowing their heads until their muzzles brushed the snow-dusted ground. The laughter died instantly. The soldiers looked at each other, uncertain, afraid. I said nothing. I simply stood there, the cold curling around me like breath. For the first time, I saw fear, not mockery, in their eyes. When I returned inside, the torches in the corridor guttered out as I passed. The maids pretended not to notice, but I saw the way one crossed herself and whispered a prayer to the moon. By the third week, rumors spread faster than fire. Some said the moon had cursed me for daring to wear her mark. Others said I was the curse itself, that the king's jest had awakened something ancient, something best left buried. Kaelin, amused by the gossip, ordered that I continue attending court functions. "Let them look," he said with that careless arrogance that came so easily to him. "Let them see how harmless you are." So I stood beside him, draped in silver silk, a silent ornament at the edge of his throne. The courtiers bowed to him and avoided my gaze. But I could feel it, the pulse beneath their skin, the tremor of unease when my shadow brushed theirs. Even Kaelin's laughter, once effortless, began to falter. The omen on his wrist still burned faintly blue. Some nights, I saw him staring at it in the reflection of a darkened mirror, expression unreadable. He caught me watching once. "Do you think your curse is spreading, little queen?" he asked softly. I didn't answer, perhaps because I wasn't sure it was a curse at all. When he left me that night, I stood alone before the mirror. The frost had formed again, delicate, intricate, like runes I almost recognized. My reflection looked back at me, lips parted, eyes alight with something I couldn't name. The air hummed, faint but real, vibrating through my ribs like the echo of a promise. "Mock me," I whispered to the empty chamber. My breath fogged the glass, blurring my face. "Until the moon decides it's time to listen." Outside, the wind howled through the mountain passes, carrying the sound of distant wolves bowing to a name they didn't yet know. They called it a celebration, another of Kaelin's endless feasts meant to remind the realm that Silverpine's Alpha King feared nothing, not prophecy, not the moon, not even the wife he had married as a jest. I had learned to move through these gatherings like a shadow, unseen, untouched, unheard. The court glittered under chandeliers of moonstone and gold, laughter thick with wine and arrogance. Every noblewoman wore her rank like armor. Every warrior bragged about blood spilled in Kaelin's name. I sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, my crown of frostlight silver, a token mockery resting on hair that never seemed to warm. The scent of roasted venison and spiced mead clung to the air. The laughter was constant, until Kaelin rose from his throne. His movements, smooth and deliberate, commanded silence before he even spoke. He lifted his goblet, eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "To the moon," he said, voice low and rich, "who still hasn't struck me down for marrying her favorite disappointment." The court erupted in laughter, dozens of voices echoed through the vaulted hall, and I felt the familiar sting, sharp but distant now, dulled by repetition. Their cruelty no longer surprised me. What startled me was the faint hum beneath my skin, the same vibration that had been growing stronger with each passing night. When Kaelin's gaze met mine, I knew something in him had noticed it too. He smiled, a slow, deliberate thing that never reached his eyes. "Dance for us, little queen," he said. The room went still. I could feel the attention sharpen like claws unsheathed. Even the musicians hesitated. They looked at him, then at me. No one refused the Alpha King, not even the woman he'd reduced to spectacle. I rose. The silk of my gown whispered against the marble floor, silver threads catching the light of the torches that lined the hall. The music began, a haunting, lilting rhythm older than any of them understood. I had heard it once before, long ago, when my mother still lived, and the moon's blessings were whispered in secret. Kaelin descended from his dais, every step echoing like thunder in the silence. He extended a hand, mock chivalry gleaming in his smile. "Surely you remember how to dance," he murmured, loud enough for all to hear. I placed my hand in his. The contact should have burned from shame or anger, but instead something ancient stirred, faint at first, then pulsing, alive. His skin was warm, but beneath it I felt something else. A thread, invisible yet electric, connecting us. The moment his palm closed around mine, the torches dimmed. Gasps rippled through the hall. A blue shimmer flickered at the edge of my vision, running along the walls like liquid light. The musicians faltered, strings trembling into silence. Kalen's smirk faltered too. "Keep playing," he ordered, though his voice wasn't steady. The music stumbled forward. We began to move, our steps measured, circling each other like predators pretending to waltz. He led, but it was I who matched every motion perfectly, mirroring his grace, defying his control. The air thickened. The scent of iron and cedar filled my lungs. When his hand slid from mine to my waist, the hum beneath my skin became a surge. I felt it rise from my core like a tidal pull, an ache that was not pain but power long restrained. The moment his thumb brushed the curve of my wrist, the world shifted. Every torch in the hall flared blue. The flame hissed, bending toward us as if drawn to something unseen. Shadows fled from the walls. Gasps turned into silence, pure, stunned silence. I heard someone whisper, "The king's mark. Look at his hand." Kalen froze. I followed their gaze. The sigil burned across his wrist, the mark that had lain dormant since the war 5 years ago. It blazed with the same cold light as the torches, alive again after years of dead ash. His breathing changed, short, sharp, disbelieving. I felt the pulse of his heartbeat through our joined hands. The power wasn't only mine, it was moving between us, feeding, answering something ancient neither of us understood. He released me abruptly, as if my touch had seared him. The music stopped. I stumbled back a step, the cold rush of separation making me sway. My palms glowed faintly, the last of that strange light fading from my skin. "Enough," Kalen said, but his voice broke halfway through the word. He flexed his fingers as if trying to extinguish the mark, but it only flared brighter before finally dimming to its usual dark ink. No one dared speak. Even the courtiers who lived to sneer at me now looked away. Their mockery had died, replaced by something heavier. Fear. I met his eyes. For the first time since the day of our wedding, Kalen Draven, the Alpha King who had built an empire on dominance, looked uncertain. The lines of his jaw were rigid, but his gaze wavered. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "I danced," I said. My voice was calm, steady, too steady. "Just as you commanded." His expression hardened, but not fast enough to hide the flicker of unease. Around us, the hall remained unnaturally cold, frost forming delicate webs across the floor tiles where we had stood. Kalen turned away first. "End the feast," he told the guards. "Now." The courtiers scattered, their chatter hushed, their eyes darting to the floor as they passed me. I stood alone beneath the dying torches, the scent of frost and smoke heavy in the air. When I looked down, a thin trace of silver shimmered beneath my skin, fading as quickly as it appeared. The hum inside me was no longer faint. It thrummed with quiet certainty. Whatever bond Kalen thought he'd forged to humiliate me had shifted. The moon had felt my pulse and answered, and for the first time, the Alpha King could not meet my gaze. The palace was never truly silent. Even at night, it breathed, groaned, whispered, remembered. Stone held memory here. It hummed with secrets too heavy to be spoken aloud. I learned that if you listened closely enough, even the walls would confess. That night, after the Feast of Thorns, I found myself drawn to the western wing, the oldest part of Silverpine Palace. It was a place few dared to wander. The air smelled of dust and forgotten prayers, the corridors lined with doors that hadn't been opened in decades. The guards rarely patrolled there. They said the rooms were haunted by the ghosts of the first queens. Perhaps they were. I hoped they were. Ghosts, at least, might understand me. I carried a single candle, its flame shivering each time I turned a corner. My heart still hadn't slowed since the banquet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blue fire, felt the surge of power that had jumped between Kalen's skin and mine, the mark on his wrist burning alive again. The way the court had looked at me afterward, not as a joke, but as a question no one dared ask aloud. He hadn't spoken to me since, but I could still feel him somewhere in the palace, restless, pacing, angry at himself for something he couldn't explain. That made two of us. The western wing ended in an arched passage leading to the royal archives, sealed by heavy oak doors banded with iron. I had seen them once before. Kalen's scholars guarded the keys jealously, claiming only the Alpha's blood could open them. Yet as I approached, the locks clicked softly, one after another, as if recognizing me. I hesitated. Then I pushed. The door opened with a sigh, releasing air stale with centuries of secrets. Shelves lined the room from floor to ceiling, packed with scrolls, ledgers, and brittle tomes. Cobwebs hung like lace in the corners. I stepped inside, and the candle flame leaned forward, eager, its light catching on a tapestry half buried under dust. The woven image was familiar, the twin moons above a kneeling wolf, its body half light, half shadow. Beneath it, faint runes glimmered silver in the flicker of my candle. I brushed the dust away with trembling fingers. The one born beneath twin moons shall bear the breath of both Alpha and Moon. The words pulsed faintly, as if alive, the thread itself thrumming with recognition. My breath caught. I had seen those words before. No, I had heard them. My mother's voice echoed from a time I'd spent years trying to forget. Born under the twin moons, my little one, you'll carry both breath and burden. I remembered her hands, stained with herbs, trembling as she held me, the smell of smoke in the air, the sound of soldiers outside. She had been executed as a witch 3 days later. The memory hit me like a blow, stealing my breath. I sank to the floor, the candle trembling in my grip. They had said she practiced forbidden healing, that she had used moonfire to cure a child of the pox. The court called it heresy, the Alpha Council called it rebellion. My father, too frightened to fight, had turned away, and I, just a child, had been hidden, branded weak, raised to believe I was nothing. But it hadn't been misfortune. It had been containment. I traced the prophecy again, feeling the hum of it against my fingertips, born beneath twin moons. That night had come only once in a century, when both lunar orbs crossed paths in the sky, a moment of balance between darkness and light. My mother had told me the moon touched her belly in that moment, marking me before I ever breathed. Both Alpha and Moon, power and compassion, strength and restraint. The two forces Silverpine had spent centuries dividing. The hierarchy existed because the pack had chosen to sever them. Alphas claiming command, Omegas silenced into servitude. But the prophecy spoke of reunion, and I, rejected Omega, humiliated queen, was the proof. The thought terrified me. My hands shook, but the flame in my candle burned higher, steadier, as if fueled by my fear. On a nearby shelf, I noticed a leather-bound ledger sealed with wax. The crest was Kalen's family sigil, a wolf crowned by flame. I broke the seal carefully and turned the brittle pages. It was a lineage record, each Alpha chronicled, each Luna's bloodline recorded. Until it came to Kalen's mother, her name had been struck through. In its place was a single word in red ink, forbidden. Below it, another entry, almost erased. Child born of the healer's line. My pulse stumbled. The healer's line. My mother's clan. I stared at the page, disbelief and dread warring in my chest. Kalen's blood and mine were not meant to meet. Not in union, not in power. The court would have seen it as heresy, the blending of what the ancestors had split apart. But the moon had wanted it. I set the book down, my mind racing, the truth expanding like fire through frost. My rejection, my exile, my forced marriage. They weren't random cruelties. They were designed to keep the prophecy buried, to keep me hidden from myself. The candles sputtered. I looked up, and the tapestry's eyes, the woven wolf, seemed to glint faintly silver. For a heartbeat, I swore I saw it breathe. "I see now," I whispered. It wasn't rejection. It was fear. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the stained glass until it sang. Somewhere deep within the palace, I heard the wolves stir, restless, uneasy. The flame in my hand tilted, stretching toward the tapestry's runes, which now shimmered bright enough to cast shadows on the floor. My reflection in the glass behind them flickered, half light, half dark. I was born to bridge them, and in that moment, beneath the hum of old stone and prophecy, I understood why Kalen's mark had burned when our skin touched. His downfall had never been my curse. It was my awakening. The nightmares began 3 nights after I found the prophecy. At first, I thought they were only dreams, fragments of fear stitched together by exhaustion, but the entire palace was dreaming with me. I could hear it in the way the wolves howled after midnight, their cries rising and falling in a rhythm too deliberate to be random. The sound echoed through the marble halls, winding around my name like a prayer, or a warning. "Lyra, even asleep," Kalen heard it. I knew, because I saw him once in the corridor before dawn, half-dressed, eyes rimmed in silver fatigue. The mark on his wrist pulsed through the thin linen of his sleeve, still faintly blue, the color of old fire. When he saw me standing at the end of the hall, he froze. For the briefest instant, something in him faltered, not anger, not pride, but confusion. Then he masked it again, as he always did. "Return to your chambers," he ordered, his voice rough, "until I decide what this is." "What this is?" I repeated softly. "The moon calling? Or your fear answering?" His eyes darkened. "Enough, Lyra." That was the end of it. Or it should have been. The next morning, guards arrived at my door. Not the usual ones. These were Kalen's personal sentinels, handpicked from the alpha ranks. They stood like statues, armored in silver, their faces hidden behind helms engraved with the royal sigil. "By order of His Majesty," one said, bowing stiffly. "Her Grace is to remain within her chambers until further notice." "Why?" I asked. They didn't answer. They didn't have to. The fear in their scent said enough. I'd seen that look before. Soldiers pretending obedience while praying for distance. To them, I wasn't Queen or Omega anymore. I was something unnatural, the reason their wolves woke trembling before dawn. "Tell your king," I said quietly. "That confinement doesn't suit his new queen." The taller of the 2 guards hesitated. "Please, my lady. Do not make this difficult." He reached for my wrist. And something inside me, something that had been whispering, pulsing, waiting, rose to the surface. I don't know what they smelled first, fear or power, but the air shifted instantly. My scent, usually soft and subdued, turned sharp and electric. The kind of scent that didn't invite dominance, but challenged it. Their wolves answered before their bodies could. A low growl erupted from one guard's throat. His hands trembled, his pupils dilated, reflecting the faint blue light that seemed to shimmer around us. The other staggered back, clutching at his chest, fighting the shift. "Stop," I said, but it wasn't a plea. It was instinct, alpha instinct, though I didn't recognize it then. They didn't stop. The taller one dropped to his knees, gasping, his bones cracking under the force of involuntary transformation. Fur split through his armor, and within seconds, a massive gray wolf crouched before me, whimpering low, eyes burning with submission. The other followed, his body twisting violently until he too fell, panting, half-shifted. Both of them bowed their heads. To me, The moment broke like glass. I stumbled backward, breath shallow, hands shaking. The sharp scent faded, replaced by the familiar metallic tang of fear, only now it wasn't mine. It was theirs. "What are you waiting for?" I whispered. "Get up." But they didn't. They couldn't. Their wolves refused. When I finally stepped past them, their bodies trembled as if waiting for permission to breathe. The moment I crossed the threshold of the hall, the palace itself seemed to exhale. Torches guttered out. The air stilled. I didn't look back. Word traveled faster than any messenger could carry it. By noon, the servants refused to enter my wing. By dusk, I heard whispers through the keyhole. The docile queen commands wolves without a word. Kalen didn't summon me that day. He didn't need to. I could feel his fury through the walls. He was the Alpha King, and yet every howl that echoed through the valley that night carried my name. I stood by the window, watching the storm gather over Silverpine. Lightning split the sky in veins of white and blue. Each strike reflected in the glass like a mirror held too close. My reflection flickered, my eyes glowing faintly silver. The prophecy echoed in my head. Born beneath twin moons, bearing the breath of both Alpha and Moon. I had tried to deny it, to stay small, obedient, invisible. But the moon had no use for invisible queens. When the thunder rolled, I felt it in my bones. A deep vibration that matched the hum in my blood. The same pulse that had flared in Kalen's mark. The same energy that bent wolves to my will. I wasn't meant to kneel. Somewhere across the palace, I heard doors slam and voices rise, Kalen's among them, sharp and commanding. Then came the unmistakable sound of wolves shifting, claws scraping against marble, guards rushing to contain what they couldn't understand. They would blame me for it, I knew. Perhaps they were right. I pressed a hand against my chest, feeling the rhythm there. Not just a heartbeat, but a second pulse, ancient and deliberate. The wolf inside me was no longer silent, and for the first time, I understood. It wasn't my power that frightened them. It was that I wouldn't bow. The palace trembled that night, not from storm or quake, but from him, from Kalen Draven's fury made flesh. The guards had carried word faster than fire. Every corridor buzzed with whispers before he reached my door. I could feel the weight of his presence long before he entered, the rhythm of his boots against the stone, deliberate and merciless. The moment he stepped into my chambers, the air thinned, like the walls themselves remembered what fear was supposed to feel like. "Do you enjoy humiliating me?" His voice was low, the kind of low that came before ruin. I didn't rise from the window seat. I'd been watching the wolves gather in the courtyard below, dozens of them, restless, uneasy, their howls forming that same haunting rhythm. My name again. Lyra. "Humiliation," I said softly, tracing the frost on the glass with my fingertip. "That implies something left to wound." He crossed the room in 3 strides. The air between us snapped. "Don't play games," he growled. "You think I don't know what you've done? My soldiers are losing control of their wolves because of you. My court fears you. My people whisper that their king bows to a cursed queen. Do they?" I finally looked at him. "Or do they whisper that the moon's mark burns brighter on me than it does on you?" His hand shot out, gripping the arm of the chair beside me instead of my throat. The wood splintered beneath his fingers. For a moment, he looked almost startled by his own restraint. "You test limits you don't understand," he said, voice taut. "Whatever power you think you've awakened, it will destroy you before I let it destroy this pack. You still think I'm something to allow, don't you?" I stood then, slowly, the cold fabric of my gown whispering against the floor. "That if you glare hard enough, the world will bow again." "You don't see it yet, Kalen. The world isn't bowing anymore. It's listening." He laughed, a dark, hollow sound. "Listening? To what? An Omega's delusions? To truth, I said simply. He moved closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. You think you know truth? He murmured. You think you've earned the right to speak it? I should have stepped back, but I didn't. The distance between us had always been a war, and I was tired of losing by silence. You married me for a jest, my king, I said. My voice didn't rise, but it cut cleaner than any blade. Shall I now laugh when your own power trembles? Something flickered in his expression, too fast to name, too human to hide. For the first time, Kalen Draven, Alpha King of Silverpine, flinched. The room changed with him. The fire guttered low, torches dimming, until only the faint blue light from the window remained. I felt it again, that pulse between us, invisible but alive. The bond neither of us had wanted, now stirring like a thing that refused to stay buried. He noticed it too. His hand went to his wrist, to the mark that had burned during the dance. It glowed faintly through his skin, echoing the same shimmer that hummed beneath mine. Stop it, he ordered, as if command could undo what the moon herself had woven. I'm not doing anything, I said. And I wasn't. The power wasn't something I summoned. It simply was. It filled the space between us, thickening the air until it hummed with tension. Fear, longing, defiance, all tangled together. Kalen stepped closer still until I could see the pulse beating at the hollow of his throat. Whatever this is, he said, quieter now, you'll control it. You'll learn to suppress it. I tilted my head. Like you've suppressed yours? His jaw clenched. You have no idea what restraint costs me. Then stop pretending it's virtue, I said. It's fear, Kalen. You're afraid of what happens when you're not the strongest one in the room. His eyes flashed, golden for a heartbeat, wolf and man warring behind them. I am the Alpha, he snarled. And I am not your shadow. We stood like that, two storms colliding in silence. The bond pulsed again, stronger now, sharp enough to sting. I could feel his heartbeat syncing with mine, unwilling but inevitable. He reached out, fingers hovering near my throat, not to harm, but as if drawn by something he didn't understand. You don't know what you're provoking, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I should have stepped away. I should have feared him. But instead I whispered, neither do you. The air fractured between us. For a heartbeat, everything in the chamber, the fire, the frost, even the shadows, seemed to lean toward us. Then the bond snapped, invisible but audible, a pulse that rippled through the walls. Outside, the wolves began to howl again, but this time their voices didn't form my name. They formed ours. Kalen drew back as if struck. His breathing was ragged, his eyes wild with realization. The mark on his wrist burned bright enough to light the room. What have you done? He demanded. I met his gaze, calm despite the tremor running through me. I didn't do this, I said. We did. He shook his head, but the denial rang hollow. No bond can exist between us. Not truly. Tell that to your wolves, I said quietly. They already know. His stare held mine for a long, impossible moment. Then he turned away, as if afraid that another breath in my presence might unravel what was left of his certainty. When the door closed behind him, I sank to my knees, the pulse still echoing in my chest. It wasn't victory. It was recognition. The Alpha's power had met its mirror, and for the first time, neither one of us could look away. The lunar solstice came wrapped in silence, heavy, deliberate, the kind that carries warning beneath its stillness. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as the twin moons rose over Silverpine. Every solstice, the palace hosted a sacred gathering at the Temple of the Moon, a ritual older than any king, meant to renew the pack's bond with its goddess. Kalen had ordered my attendance himself, perhaps to prove I was harmless, or perhaps because he feared what would happen if I wasn't. Either way, I went. The temple stood beyond the northern courtyard, carved into the mountain's spine, its pillars engraved with ancient runes that shimmered faintly as the moons aligned overhead. Torches burned white instead of gold. The entire court had gathered, nobles, priests, and warriors draped in ceremonial furs, their faces painted with silver dust. Kalen stood at the altar, his posture the picture of power, tall, poised, untouchable. But his eyes. I had learned to read the subtle shifts now. Behind the calm, something restless moved, something he didn't want the world to see. When I entered, every head turned. The murmurs began immediately, whispers rippling through the assembly like a poisoned wind. The cursed queen. The wolf that commands. The reason the king's mark burns again. I kept my chin high. Fear was a scent predators loved to taste, and I had no intention of feeding it. Kalen extended a hand. "You're late," he said, voice clipped. "Time bends for the moon," I answered softly, stepping beside him. "I thought you'd learned that by now." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The high priest, an ancient man wrapped in layers of white silk, raised his staff and signaled for silence. The ceremony began. Chants filled the air, low, rhythmic, primal. The torches flickered with every syllable, shadows twisting into strange shapes against the stone walls. I could feel the energy building, thrumming beneath my skin, the same vibration that had haunted me since the night of the dance. The priest approached the altar, his voice echoing through the hall. "The moon watches," he intoned. "Her gaze falls upon the worthy, her silence upon the false." I should have looked away then, but something compelled me to step forward. The closer I drew to the altar, the louder the hum inside me became. My blood sang with it. The silver thread of the prophecy, the one I'd found in the archives, seemed to awaken beneath my skin. Kalen's hand brushed my arm. "Don't," he murmured under his breath. "Not here. Not now." But it was already too late. The moment the moons crossed, light over light, the hum in my body surged into something blinding. A searing heat erupted at my collarbone, sharp and sudden enough to make me gasp. The room froze. Every chant faltered. Light spilled from my skin. I looked down and saw it, a perfect crescent, glowing silver and alive, carved into flesh that did not bleed. The mark pulsed like a heartbeat, each thrum sending waves of light across the temple floor. The crowd recoiled, gasps, prayers, curses, all tangled together. Someone dropped to their knees, someone else screamed. "The moon's brand," the high priest whispered, his staff trembling in his hands. "It's hers." Kalen's face drained of color. "What does it mean?" he demanded. The priest sank to his knees. "It means she is chosen, the moon's own. No mortal may command her, not king, not council, not creed." The hall erupted. Voices collided in chaos. Some shouted for my execution, others begged for forgiveness. Warriors pressed their backs against the wall, eyes wide, torn between fear and reverence. Kalen stood in the center of it all, his authority cracking beneath the weight of revelation. He looked at me, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time. The mark's light reflected in his eyes, painting him half gold, half silver. "You knew," he said quietly, accusation laced with disbelief. I shook my head. "I only knew I wasn't nothing." The priest's voice rose again. "Your Majesty, tradition decrees that the moon's chosen cannot be bound by law or throne. She stands above both. To harm her is to defy the goddess herself." The words struck like thunder. For a moment, Kalen's pride, the fortress he lived inside, shattered. He turned to his court, who were already kneeling, trembling, bowing their heads not to him, but to me. I didn't ask for their reverence. It felt wrong, cold, but it wasn't mine to refuse. The moon had claimed me, and the pack would obey. Kalen's voice cut through the chaos. Enough! His command carried alpha weight, heavy and final. Slowly, the hall stilled. He faced the priest, eyes dark with restrained fury. If the moon has chosen her, then she stands under my protection. Anyone who questions her questions me. It was the only way he could keep control, by wrapping my divinity inside his authority. A king defending what he could not own. The priest bowed low. Then may the moon judge the truth of your heart, my king. Kalen ignored him. He stepped closer, his voice low enough for only me to hear. You've trapped us both, Lyra, he said. The moon may favor you, but the court sees your power as mine. You've left me no choice but to stand beside you. Then stand, I whispered. For once, not above me. His gaze lingered on the mark burning against my skin, the light fading slowly back into flesh. It will change everything, he murmured. It already has. Outside, the wolves began to howl, not in warning this time, but in worship. Their voices carried across the valley, rising in perfect harmony with the moons above. And there, under their cry, the Alpha King who had mocked the goddess's will bowed his head, not to me, but to the force that bound us both. For the first time, Kalen Draven learned what it meant to kneel. The palace had grown too quiet. That kind of silence only comes before a betrayal. I could feel it, thick in the air, humming just beneath the sound of polished boots and whispering robes. The courtiers no longer bowed with mockery. They bowed with fear. They smiled, but their eyes darted to the mark on my collarbone as though it might burst into flame. Every day since the solstice, I woke to find new offerings at my door: silver lilies, lunar stones, prayers written on scraps of silk. None from Kalen. He had kept his distance since the ceremony, speaking little, watching much. His eyes followed me with the wariness of a man trying to tame his own thoughts. The bond between us was still there. Stronger now. Stranger. Some nights, I would wake to the sound of his heartbeat echoing faintly through mine. Other nights, I would feel the pulse of anger, his or mine. It was hard to tell anymore. The moon had twined us together, whether either of us liked it or not, and that bond made the court restless. By the end of that week, the council stopped pretending their fear was reverence. They whispered when Kalen wasn't there, about curses and false queens, about how a woman touched by the moon could not be ruled, only destroyed. I overheard two of them one night in the corridor outside the war chamber. She's unmaking him, one said. Every night he dreams her name. Every day the mark burns his skin. And if we do nothing, another replied, it won't just be his throne she consumes. It will be all of Silverpine. They didn't know I was there. Or maybe they did and thought I wouldn't act. I didn't. Not then. I wanted to see what Kalen would do when the truth reached him. It didn't take long. The next morning, his guards dragged the same two counselors into the throne room, their wrists bound in silver cords. Kalen's voice was quiet but lethal. Treason, he said, the word falling like ice. You plotted to kill your queen. One of them laughed, a dry, desperate sound. We plotted to save you, my king. Kalen's hand clenched on the hilt of his sword. He could have ended them right there, but he didn't. He hesitated, staring at them with something close to pity or doubt. He turned toward me then, and in that moment, I saw the truth he was trying to hide. He didn't know whether he was protecting me or protecting himself from what would happen if I died. That was the breaking point, not for the council, for me, because it meant he didn't yet understand what kind of power he'd been given, or how little control he had over it. That night, I made my decision. I waited until the moons reached their peak, their twin lights spilling silver through my window. I dressed in white, not the color of purity, but of offering. I left my chambers without a word to the guards. They didn't stop me. No one dared touch me now. The temple awaited, the same hall where the mark had revealed itself, where the court had first bowed. I knew they would strike there. The council didn't believe in coincidence, they believed in spectacle. If they were going to kill me, they would do it where the moon could see. And so I went to meet them. The air inside the temple was colder than I remembered. Candles guttered in their holders, long wax tears staining the altar. The runes on the floor glowed faintly beneath the dust, alive, aware. The walls remembered what the moon had done here. I stepped into the center and waited. The first figure appeared from the shadows, then another, then three more. They wore cloaks of dark fur, masks carved with the sigil of the royal crest. Kaelin's most trusted advisors. "Your Majesty," one of them said mockingly, "we come to restore balance." I smiled. "You mean to spill blood and call it mercy? You were never meant to rule." Another hissed. "The moon's chosen belongs to no throne." I tilted my head. "Then why does your king burn when I do?" That silenced them. The truth always did. Behind them, a low voice cut through the stillness. "Enough." Kaelin stepped into the light. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between rage and sorrow. The sword at his hip gleamed faintly, but his hand didn't move toward it. "Leave us," he ordered the counselors. One protested. "Sire." I said leave. They hesitated, but his tone was command, pure and undeniable. They withdrew, vanishing into the shadows they'd come from. When the hall was empty, he turned to me. "Why did you come here?" "Because you wouldn't," I said. "You still think you can protect me, but you're really protecting yourself, from what you feel, from what the moon's made of us." He stepped closer, the light catching the mark on his wrist. It was glowing again, faint but steady. "You think I fear you?" "No," I said. "You fear the truth, that your power isn't yours anymore. It never was. The moon chose both of us. You just can't stand that she gave me the part that commands you." His breath caught, barely, but I saw it. He was breaking, and he knew it. For a heartbeat, I almost pitied him. The Alpha King, who had never bowed to anyone, now caught between worship and denial. "I didn't come here to challenge you," I said quietly. "I came so you wouldn't have to lie to yourself when the moon reveals it anyway." Outside, thunder rolled, not from the sky, but from the mountains. The wolves howled again, the sound threading through stone and bone alike. Kaelin looked up at the altar, then back at me. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. "If she exposes me, she exposes us both." "Then let her," I whispered. "Truth doesn't break what was meant to survive." He took another step forward, close enough that I could see the flicker of silver in his eyes. "Careful, Lyra," he said, softer than I'd ever heard him. "You're forcing me to choose between my pride and my queen." I held his gaze, unflinching. "Then choose." And as the moons crossed above us once more, I knew. He already had. The night of the ritual began with smoke, thin, metallic, and wrong. The kind of scent that lingers before a blade finds its mark. Silverpine had not known peace since the solstice. The court moved like wolves pacing a cage, waiting for someone to draw first blood. And tonight, they finally would. The ritual was meant to cleanse the mark's power, to quiet the moon's whisper that had spread through the palace since the night of revelation. The high priest had insisted it would stabilize the bond between Kaelin and me. I knew better. Rituals born of fear never cleansed. They only provoked what they didn't understand. Kaelin hadn't looked at me since dawn, not properly. He'd been pacing the temple's edge like a shadow torn between duty and guilt. The moons hung directly above the mountain, twin eyes unblinking, and I could feel them both staring straight through us. "Stay close," he murmured as we stepped toward the altar. The council will attend. If they make a move, If they make a move, I said quietly, you'll finally see what the moon made me for. He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. Beneath the stoicism, his pulse was a drum I could feel even without touching him. The bond between us had grown unbearable, alive, dangerous. It burned whenever we were too near and ached whenever we were apart. The temple doors sealed with a resonant clang. The crowd fell silent. Torches lined the walls in perfect symmetry, their flames white and still. The high priest lifted his staff. By blood and bond, he declared, we summon the light to purge shadow. The king and his queen shall stand beneath the moon's gaze, and the truth within shall be revealed. The first chant rose, low and rhythmic, vibrating through the floor. Kaelin and I stepped forward, our hands joined as the ceremony required. The air thickened instantly, the same charge that always lived between us flaring into something tangible. The runes carved into the stone began to glow beneath our feet. That was when I heard it, the faint click of a crossbow string hidden beneath the chant. Instinct moved faster than thought. I pulled Kaelin down just as the first bolt flew past, grazing my shoulder. The chant dissolved into screams. The guards lunged forward, but more bolts followed, from the balcony, from the shadows behind the altar. The council had chosen their moment well. Kaelin's sword flashed, silver in the firelight. Rebels, he snarled. They mean to end it here. I saw one of the councilmen raise his hand, a signal, and suddenly the torches turned red. Oil, thick, dark, flammable, spilled from urns hidden along the pillars. The smell of pitch filled the air. Kaelin grabbed my arm. Get behind me! But the moment he spoke, I saw the flames streak toward us, a lit arrow, arcing straight for the altar. There wasn't time to think, only to move. I stepped in front of him. The arrow struck the stone beside me, and the world exploded into fire. The blast hurled Kaelin backward, but it didn't touch me. Not the way it should have. The heat hit, but it didn't burn. It filled me, like breath returning after drowning. For the first time, I didn't fight it. I let the fire in. The mark at my collarbone seared bright, spilling silver light through my veins. The moon's hum roared into a living song, one that only I could hear. The flames bent toward me, coiling, waiting. Kaelin shouted my name, his voice raw, but I couldn't answer. I could barely stand. My body was no longer only mine. It was conduit, vessel, bridge. The moon's flame flowed through me, white and clean, not consuming, but cleansing. I raised my hands. The fire obeyed. It swept through the temple in a great arc, devouring shadows and liars alike. Screams filled the air, short and sharp, then silenced as the fire decided who to spare. I watched it choose, curling away from the loyal, consuming the treacherous. Even Kaelin's blade glowed blue in the light, its steel purified. When the last spark dimmed, half the hall lay in ruin. Ash floated through the air like snow. The surviving guards knelt where they stood, trembling, their faces streaked with soot and disbelief. Kaelin was on his knees, too, staring at me as if I were something both holy and unbearable. Lyra, he breathed. What are you? I wanted to answer, but my voice failed. The light inside me was too strong now, pressing against skin that could no longer contain it. The bond between us flared again, blinding, his heartbeat slamming against mine through the tether the moon had forged. I staggered. My vision blurred. Silver light spilled from my fingertips, spreading in rivers across the floor. Kaelin caught me before I fell, his hands burning where they touched. I felt his heartbeat race beneath his grip. Fear, awe, something else. The flames dimmed around us, leaving only the faint blue glow of the mark. The high priest crawled from behind the altar, eyes wide with terror. Half shifter, he whispered hoarsely, half divine, the moon's flame incarnate. I tried to speak, to tell them I wasn't a goddess, only a woman who finally stopped running from what she was. But the words never came. The world tilted. and I felt my body grow weightless. Kalen's voice followed me into the dark, a desperate whisper against my hair. Stay with me. I wanted to. The warmth of his hands felt human again, steady, real. But the moon was pulling, calling me towards something deeper than flesh and blood. My last sight was of Kalen's face bathed in silver light, the reflection of my fire dancing in his eyes. Then everything went quiet. Not empty, just still. The moon's flame had found its vessel, and the queen who once bowed now burned bright enough for gods to see. The world was still burning when I heard him call my name. At first, it was faint, just a whisper cutting through the roar of flame and the collapse of stone. Then it grew louder, sharper, until it broke against the edge of my consciousness. Lyra. I felt the weight of his hands before I opened my eyes. Kalen was kneeling beside me, his palms pressed against my shoulders, his skin streaked with ash and blood. His crown was gone, the proud iron circlet lost somewhere in the wreckage. For the first time since I had known him, he looked nothing like a king. He looked human. Stay with me, he said, voice shaking. Do you hear me? You don't get to leave me like this. I wanted to answer, to tell him I wasn't leaving, but words wouldn't come. The air around me shimmered with a strange, soft light. My veins still glowed faintly silver, pulsing to the rhythm of a heartbeat that was no longer entirely mine. Kalen's gaze followed the glow, horror dawning in his eyes. The fire, he whispered. You took it all, every spark. Why didn't you let me? Because you would have died, I breathed, barely audible. He shook his head, disbelief and guilt twisting his face. And now you will. I tried to smile. Maybe that's the point. He made a sound, half laugh, half broken sob. No, he said fiercely. No more sacrifices. No more omens. You've already given enough. He pressed his forehead to mine. I could feel his pulse hammering beneath his skin, frantic, human, alive. If I mocked the moon's gift, he whispered, let it be my pride that burns, not her chosen. Those words caught somewhere deep inside me, striking a chord that reverberated through my blood. The bond between us flared, painful and beautiful all at once. I felt his regret as clearly as my own heartbeat, his memories bleeding into mine. The wedding, where laughter had echoed like knives. The night he ordered me locked away. The first time my name trembled on his tongue like something forbidden. His cruelty hadn't come from hatred. It had come from fear, the fear of losing control, of kneeling to something greater than himself. And now, he was kneeling anyway. The hall around us was a ruin. The marble floors had cracked open, revealing veins of molten silver that glowed from the moon's flame. The bodies of the fallen were scattered like shadows frozen in surrender. Only those who had stood for truth still breathed, their faces turned toward us in stunned silence. Kalen's tears fell freely now, streaking pale lines down his soot-covered cheeks. Please, he whispered, gripping my hand as if sheer will could tether me to this world. Please, Lyra, don't go. I swear, I'll change everything. The laws, the ranks, the cruelty I let live under my name. I'll burn it all if I have to. Just live. The sound of his voice, raw, stripped of command, cut deeper than any wound I had ever carried. I wanted to tell him that this wasn't about life or death. It was about what came after. The moon had shown me once what balance meant. Not victory, not dominance, but unity. Alpha and Omega, strength and surrender, power and compassion. Two halves of a whole that had long forgotten how to meet. And now, through Kalen's brokenness, I understood why she had chosen us. Light began to spill from my chest, brighter than before. The air thickened, heavy with power, and the scent of burnt sage and frost filled the hall. Kalen flinched, his hand still clinging to mine, even as the glow intensified. "Lyra," he said, his voice breaking. "What's happening?" I looked up at him, feeling the last remnants of fear fade away. "The moon doesn't destroy, Kaelin," I said softly. "She restores." My body trembled, not from pain but release. The glow spread, silver threads weaving through skin and sinew, reshaping, rebirthing. My bones hummed like struck crystal. My blood ran molten with lunar fire. The transformation came not as violence, but as peace. My hair turned pale as moonlight, drifting around me like smoke. My eyes, once amber, now shone silver, mirroring the twin moons above. My pulse was no longer just human. It echoed with something vast, ancient, infinite. I was no longer just Lyra Vale, the rejected Omega. I was the embodiment of what the old texts had promised, the balance between alpha and moon, dominance and devotion, chaos and harmony, the ancient Luna reborn. Kaelin stumbled back, awe warring with grief in his gaze. "You're not leaving," I finished gently, "only changing." He reached for me again, but his fingers passed through light instead of flesh. I caught his wrist, guiding his trembling hand until his palm rested over my heart. "You once said I was a jest," I whispered, "a mockery to appease fate. But the moon doesn't jest, Kaelin. She teaches." His lips parted, 1,000 words dying unsaid. "You taught me pride," I continued, my voice steady now, "and I taught you mercy. Together, we unmade the cruelty that ruled this pack. That was the bond the moon intended all along." The light around us surged one last time, enveloping the ruined hall. The fire on the walls died instantly, leaving behind a soft, silvery mist. When it cleared, the survivors saw a sight that none would ever forget. The Alpha King kneeling in ash, cradling the Queen reborn in silver light. He bowed his head, not to a goddess, but to the woman who had shown him what it meant to be one. And as the moon rose higher, her reflection danced in my eyes. I smiled faintly and whispered the last truth he needed to hear. "Balance was never weakness, Kaelin. It was the strength you spent your life trying to find." He looked up, tears catching the silver glow. And for the first time in the history of kings, the proudest alpha in Silverpine whispered not an order, but a prayer. I remember the moment the light broke through me, not as pain, but as surrender. The air was thick with ash and silence. The great hall, once drenched in arrogance and blood, had fallen utterly still. Only Kaelin's breathing filled the emptiness, ragged and human, a fragile sound against the hum that filled my veins. The moon's fire no longer burned me. It was me. Every pulse of light in my body sang with something older than life itself, a rhythm that did not seek to destroy, but to balance. Kaelin was still kneeling beside me, eyes wide, hand trembling where it touched the ground. The firelight danced across his face, painting him in gold and shadow. For the first time, I saw no fear there, only awe. "Lyra," he whispered, as though speaking my name might anchor me. "If you can hear me, stop. You'll burn yourself away." But I wasn't burning. I was becoming. The transformation began slow, the way dawn touches the horizon, unsure at first, then unstoppable. My skin shimmered like liquid silver, veins glowing faintly beneath the surface. I felt the shift before it happened, a pull deep in my chest, a call older than blood. Bones realigned, muscle reformed, and for a moment, I hovered between worlds. Neither woman nor wolf, neither mortal nor divine. Then the light fractured, and I stepped through. The floor beneath me cracked, runes blazing to life underfoot. My hair dissolved into white flame, my skin melted into the sheen of moonlight. Fur rippled across my limbs, not coarse like an ordinary wolf's, but soft, radiant, translucent, like light woven into form. My eyes, once gold, now mirrored the eclipse itself, a halo of silver surrounding infinite darkness. I stood, no longer Lyra the rejected Omega, nor the trembling bride mocked before the court. I stood as something else entirely, something the old songs had whispered about, but no one had ever seen. The ancient Luna reborn. Kaelin rose halfway, as if torn between reverence and disbelief. "Gods," he murmured. "I'm not a god," I said, my voice both echo and whisper, two tones layered together, human and something beyond. "I'm what we forgot we were meant to be." He took one step closer, then stopped. The air between us trembled, heavy with power that was no longer wild, but whole. Outside, the wolves began to gather. I heard them before I saw them, the sound of hundreds of paws against stone, claws scraping earth. They came from every direction, the palace, the forests, the valley below, drawn not by command, but by instinct. When they entered the hall, they didn't growl. They didn't bare their teeth. They bowed, not to dominance, not to fear, but to harmony. Kaelin looked around him, stunned, as even his own alpha guard dropped to one knee. The room shimmered with the hum of countless heartbeats sinking into one rhythm. I felt it inside me, the pack's pulse merging with mine. For the first time in centuries, every wolf in Silverpine breathed as one. The magic of hierarchy unraveled, no ranks, no chains, no division, only unity. Kaelin swallowed hard, his pride trembling beneath the weight of understanding. Slowly, painfully, he lowered his head, not in defeat, but in reverence. When his knee touched the ground, the ripples spread. Outside the hall, wolves howled, not in submission, but in harmony. Their voices rose like music, each note carrying the memory of a world that had once been whole. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I saw everything. The wars that had broken the packs apart, the centuries of dominance, of cruelty disguised as strength, the forgotten truth of what the moon had once given us, not hierarchy, but balance. And then I let it go. The moon's light spilled from me in waves, washing over the wolves like a tide of forgiveness. Every scar, every mark of rank, every wound born of power, all of it faded in the glow. The light didn't demand worship. It simply reminded them who they were beneath the hunger for control. Kaelin looked up at me again, his voice raw. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," I said softly. "There's nothing left to conquer." He bowed his head once more, this time without shame. Around us, the wolves followed. Not one knee bent out of fear, only peace. Even the youngest cubs stilled, their eyes reflecting the light that no longer belonged to one, but to all. I stepped closer to Kaelin, lowering my massive form until my muzzle brushed his hand. The touch was gentle, an acknowledgement, not a claim. He closed his fingers around a strand of silver fur, his breath unsteady. "Lyra," he whispered, "what happens now?" I met his gaze, my eyes reflecting both moons above. "Now," I said, "we remember what it means to be whole." The light began to fade, not dying, but settling, folding itself back into the bones of the earth, into every wolf's heartbeat. The air was still warm when my form began to shift again, fur giving way to skin, flame to flesh. When it was done, I stood before him once more as the woman he'd once mocked, bare and human beneath the pale moonlight. But now, his gaze didn't dare belittle me. Kaelin reached for me, hesitated, then let his hand fall. His voice was barely a whisper. "You've changed everything." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "We did." The howls outside rose again, not cries of beasts, but hymns of balance, carried on the night wind. For the first time, Silverpine did not belong to the strong or the broken. It belonged to all, And beneath the twin moons, I felt it, the world exhaling, the beginning of peace. The palace stood in ruin when the dawn came. The fires had long died out, leaving only smoke and silence. The marble walls that once gleamed with arrogance were blackened, cracked, softened by ash. Statues of kings, men who had ruled through dominance, lay toppled across the courtyard, their faces shattered, their crowns broken at their feet. And in the midst of it all, I stood barefoot on the cold stone, the last embers of the moon's light flickering faintly across my skin before fading entirely. The power was gone now, drawn back into the heavens that had lent it. What remained was only me, my body trembling with exhaustion, my heartbeat echoing faintly through the hollow of my chest. The mark at my collarbone still shimmered, but faintly, as though the moon herself had kissed me one last time before retreating. Kalen stood a few paces away, his sword discarded, his armor dented and scorched. His once pristine cloak hung in tatters, his hands raw from dragging the wounded from the flames. Around us, the survivors moved slowly, dazed and reverent, speaking in hushed tones as if afraid to disturb what lingered between us. He hadn't spoken to me since the night of the fire. He didn't have to. Every look said what words could not. That something inside him had broken, and through that fracture, understanding had finally begun to grow. By the time the sun rose fully, the palace grounds were cleared. The dead were buried beneath the silver pines, their graves marked not by rank or title, but by stones of equal size. It was the first order Kalen gave without a council's approval. The council, after all, no longer existed. When the last stone was laid, he came to me. I was standing before what had once been the throne room, a hollow shell now, its ceiling caved in, the golden seat of power melted to slag. Only the base remained, cracked but standing, as if waiting for a new story to be carved upon it. Kalen stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, he said nothing. The wind tugged at his hair, carrying with it the faint scent of cedar and smoke. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, were softer now, stripped of their cruelty. I used to believe strength meant ruling, he said finally, his voice hoarse. That to command was to be obeyed. That control kept the world from falling apart. He looked at the melted throne, then back at me. But I was wrong. Control destroys as surely as fire. I didn't interrupt. The silence between us was sacred now, a bridge rebuilt plank by plank. I watched you burn for this pack, he continued. I watched you face death for wolves who spat at your name. I mocked your mercy because I mistook it for weakness. He took a step closer, then another. But you were never weak. You were the only one strong enough to change what I was too proud to see. The sunlight caught the silver dust still clinging to his shoulders. For a moment, he looked like the man I'd first met, every inch the Alpha King, but hollowed, humbled, remade. What happens now? I asked quietly. He exhaled slowly, as though releasing the last of the weight he'd carried. Now, the throne dies with me. He turned to the gathered wolves, the guards, the elders, the remnants of the pack. His voice carried not as command, but as truth. Hear me, people of Silverpine, he declared. The throne that stood here ruled through blood and fear. It divided the strong from the weak, the alphas from the omegas. No more. A murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion and disbelief mingling with hope. Kalen raised his hand, silencing them. From this day forward, no wolf will kneel to another. The law of dominance ends here. The bond between Alpha and Omega, between strength and compassion, will bind us all. We will rebuild not as rulers and subjects, but as equals. He turned back to me, and his next words were not for the crowd, but for me alone. I owe my crown to cruelty, he said softly, but I owe my soul to you. Before I could speak, he dropped to one knee. Gasps echoed across the courtyard. The Alpha King, the man who had never bowed to any creature, mortal or divine, was kneeling at my feet. His head was bowed, his hands open, his voice trembling. "I thought I married weakness," he whispered. "I found the reason we survive." The wind stilled. The pack, every wolf, every survivor, bowed their heads in unison. Not out of fear, not out of rank, out of respect, out of recognition. I reached out, my hand brushing against Kalen's jaw, lifting his chin until his eyes met mine. They were no longer filled with pride, only light, the reflection of the moon that still lingered faintly in me. "You were never meant to rule above them," I said. "You were meant to lead with them." He nodded once, slowly, reverently. "And you?" "I was never meant to reign," I said, my voice soft but steady. "Only to remind you that power isn't ours to keep, it's ours to share." He rose, and together we turned toward the ruins. The first rays of sunlight caught the fractured stones, turning them to gold. In that light, I saw not ruin, but rebirth, the kind the moon had promised all along. Kalen reached for my hand. His grip was warm, human, fragile. I held it anyway. Behind us, the pack began to sing. Not a howl of war or mourning, but a hymn of renewal. For the first time in Silverpine's long and blood-stained history, no one bowed to a king. They stood beside him, and the world, at last, began to heal. The world remembered differently after that night. They called me many things: the Omega Queen, the Luna Reborn, the Ghost of Silverpine. But none of those names felt like mine. I had never wanted to be worshipped, only understood. It began as whispers carried by wind, spreading from mountain pack to valley tribe. Wolves who had never bowed to another told stories of a woman who shattered a crown without drawing a sword. They said she burned the old laws to ash and taught even the alphas to kneel, not to her, but to balance. Within weeks, the story grew into a legend. Across the northern territories, packs dismantled their hierarchies. The ancient marks of rank, the branded sigils burned into wolves' flesh, were scraped from the walls of their dens. In the southern forests, where Omegas once ate last and spoke only when spoken to, feasts were now shared around single fires. The pack names changed too. No longer the Blood Fangs or the Iron Claws. They called themselves by gentler names: the Kin, the Howlbound, the Silverlight. And everywhere, the same phrase was whispered with reverence: "She made the strong remember mercy." I did not stay to see it all unfold. The night after Kalen's decree, when equality was spoken aloud for the first time in centuries, I stood at the edge of the ruins and watched the moons rise. The forest beyond the palace shimmered faintly, silver mist curling between the trees. The air there felt alive, heavy with something ancient, something calling. Kalen found me standing among the ashes of the throne room. His cloak still carried the scent of smoke and frost. He didn't speak at first. He only looked at me as though trying to memorize every detail: the curve of my face, the mark that still faintly glowed at my collarbone. "You're leaving," he said quietly. I nodded. "The moon's work here is done." He stepped closer. "And mine?" I smiled faintly. "Yours is just beginning." His eyes softened, that familiar mixture of pride and sorrow flickering through them. "You think I can rule without you?" "You won't rule," I said. "You'll guide. You'll build something new. You'll show them that strength and compassion can live in the same heart." He laughed, but the sound cracked halfway through. "You always did see more in me than I deserved." I reached up, brushing my fingers across his cheek. "You grew into what you were meant to be, Kalen. That's all the moon ever wanted." He caught my hand, pressing it against his lips, then lowered it slowly. "If you walk into those woods," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "will you come back?" "The moon doesn't walk backward," I said softly, "but she always watches." He bowed his head, not as a king, not as a man defeated, but as someone who finally understood reverence. When I turned away, I didn't look back. The path into the sacred woods shimmered faintly beneath my feet, lined with silver light. As I walked, the world grew quieter, the sounds of wolves and wind fading into something like peace. That was the last time anyone saw me. But stories lived where I did not. Years passed, then decades, and with them, the legend grew. They said the forest, where I vanished, bloomed year-round, the trees bending slightly whenever the moons were full. Those who wandered too deep sometimes heard a voice in the wind, calm, patient, steady, whispering lessons they didn't know they'd needed. Kalen never took another mate. He ruled longer than any alpha before him, though he no longer called himself king. He built schools instead of fortresses, sanctuaries instead of prisons. When the younger packs came to his council, he spoke not of dominance or command, but of shared breath, the unity between all wolves, Alpha or Omega. He kept one chamber untouched in the new palace, the chamber where the fire had taken me. On nights when the moons aligned, he lit a single candle there, saying nothing, only listening. Some said he was waiting, others said he was praying. When he finally died, he was found kneeling before that candle, the same way he had knelt before me years ago. His hands were clasped, his head bowed, and on his lips, the faint trace of a smile. The wolves buried him beneath the silver pines, beside the stone where my name was carved, Lyra Vale, the queen who remembered the moon. And from that day on, every pup born beneath twin moons was taught the same truth, that strength without gentleness was hollow, and gentleness without courage was lost. That no alpha could rise without the heart of an omega beside him. They rebuilt the realm not in my image, but in the image of the balance I carried. Harmony over hunger, unity over hierarchy. And when the night winds sweep across the valleys of Silverpine, they still say the moon shines brighter there than anywhere else. Because once, she walked among them, and they learned to remember her light. The night the moons rose together again, the forest seemed to breathe. The air shimmered with silver mist, each leaf trembling with light as if the trees themselves remembered. The years had softened the world since the fire, the palace rebuilt, the fields alive again, the packs at peace. But when the twin moons climbed into the sky, side by side, the quiet stirred something deeper, something the land had not felt since I left. Kalen felt it first. He had grown older, though the years had touched him gently. His once black hair was now streaked with silver. His shoulders carried the calm weight of time. He no longer wore a crown, only a cloak of simple wool, its edges lined with the same lunar sigil that had once marked our bond. His rule had long turned from command to counsel. The pack did not fear him anymore. They followed him, because he had learned to listen. That night, he stood at the edge of Silverpine, where the sacred woods began. The air there had always been different, thicker, quieter, alive. When the wind changed, carrying the faint scent of moonflower and frost, he froze. It was a scent he could never mistake, not even after decades. I watched him from the tree line. The moons painted him in pale gold, and for a heartbeat, I saw the man I had once married. Proud, untamed, unbroken. And then, the man he had become, softened, humbled, wiser. He turned toward the sound of my steps, his breath catching before he even saw me. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." But it was. I stepped from the shadows, my form neither entirely human nor wolf. My hair shimmered faintly in the light. My eyes, twin eclipses of silver and black, reflected both moons above. Time had not aged me as it had him. I had lived where time did not flow, where the moon's voice replaced the ticking of days. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us hummed with a silence that was not empty, the kind that carried everything words could not hold. Then he took a step forward, his hands trembling. Lyra. Hearing my name from his lips again almost undid me. It sounded different now, softer, reverent. I smiled faintly. You've aged well, my king. He let out a laugh, quiet and uneven, the kind that comes after too many years of silence. And you haven't aged at all. The moon keeps her favorites young, it seems. The moon keeps her promises, I said. He looked at me then, really looked. The awe in his eyes was tempered by something else this time. Peace, acceptance. The jest is over, my king, I whispered, stepping closer. It's time you laugh again. He blinked, his throat tightening around an old, almost forgotten smile. After everything, you still call me that? I reached up, brushing my hand against his jaw. You were never a king by crown. You became one when you learned to kneel. His eyes glistened. I thought I'd never see you again. I never left, I said softly. The moon doesn't stay in one place, but she's always watching. Behind us, the pack had gathered quietly at the forest's edge. Dozens of wolves, young and old, their fur glinting in the light. They did not growl, did not move. They felt it too, the old bond stirring, the rhythm of balance awakening once more. Kaelin turned toward them, then back to me. They've waited for this night, he said. Every year, they howl for you when the moons align. I looked past him to the horizon, where the two moons glowed like twin hearts. Then let them howl tonight, not for me, but for what we became. He nodded, eyes never leaving mine. Then he raised his head, inhaled deeply, and let out a low, steady howl. It was not the call of a ruler commanding his pack, but of one soul calling to another. One by one, the others joined in. The sound rose through the trees, through the mountains, into the stars. It wasn't a sound of hunger or war. It was harmony, the echo of a promise renewed. Kaelin reached for my hand. His was rough, warm, trembling. Mine was cool, light, and unyielding. When our fingers touched, the mark at his wrist glowed again, faint at first, then brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the beat of my heart. The bond reawakened, no longer forged by command or prophecy, but by choice, by balance. The wind shifted, and I felt the moon's light pour over us like water. For the first time in many lifetimes, Alpha and Omega stood together not as opposites, but equals, two halves of the same pulse. Kaelin closed his eyes, the faintest smile breaking across his face. "Welcome home," he whispered. I leaned closer, resting my forehead against his. I was never gone. And as the pack's howls rose to their peak, the moons above us aligned, their light merging into one perfect silver circle. The old world of hierarchy and division finally dissolved beneath it. That night, Silverpine did not sing of kings or queens, of power or submission. It sang of balance. And somewhere between the earth and the stars, the moon smiled. For her jest had ended, and her lesson was finally learned.